Hi everyone, it's Cheryl from Tinker's Cart Art, and we are here this morning to paint this personalized beach painting. It's really a fun little painting. I've done it lots of different ways. Got a little bit of the ocean peeking through, pretty simple steps to achieve that look. And then what's fun about this painting is the personalization you can put in the sand so it looks a little bit like it's written in the sand. You could put the name of your favorite beach place. You could put a quote. You could just put your names. It's really fun. You can add shells and whatnot. I just added a little starfish over here, just on a little gallery wrapped canvas. I also painted some on these little chunky canvases, which I love. You can hang them or you can even stack them or put them on a mantle, and they're really fun. So let's get started. I'll show you what I used to complete this painting, and then I'll show you step by step how to complete it. So let me move these guys aside. We'll get a blank canvas here. I'm just using a little, I think it might be an 8x10 or a 9x12. You can put this on any size. I've even done it on a big 16x20. Also, it would be cool painted on a piece of wood or a palette board or something as well. So I've got my canvas, got my surface, got my paints. What I'm using for paints today, I don't have too much. I have my primary blue, like an ultramarine blue if you have it. Some primary blue would work great. I've got phthalo green. It's a very dark green. Works beautiful for water, and some yellow to get those light greens, those nice limey greens that you see in the ocean. I have white, brown. I like ivory for sand a lot of times. You can certainly mix this color up with a little bit of white and gold and a tiny bit of brown. I have it in the bottle. If you don't have it, it's no worries. You can mix it. I do like this gold color. It's like a yellow ochre gold, and I use that for a lot of things. We're going to use it in the sand a little bit. We're going to use it also for our starfish. Very basic colors though. So that's that, and I will show you my brushes as we go along. I do like these long-handled brights with a filbert edge, which filbert means it's rounded. These are a stiffer, more for oil or acrylic painting. They have a nice texture to them, and they get right into the little texture of the canvas nicely. I also do use some acrylic brushes, which you can use. You just have to dig a little harder to get that to cover into all the little grooves, but that would work fine too. So what I do, I don't need a tracer for this, excuse me. I just sketch a little line where my water is going to be. What you want to keep in mind when you do that line is just to leave enough room for whatever writing you might want to do. Just a little wavy line. That's all you need to start. And I think I will start with the sand so that we could put a little shadow here and then the water on top. For my sand, I simply go into my ivory paint. I grab a little white, and I'm just going to paint that area in. As I go, I don't like it to just be a flat color. Sand has got some texture in it. It's got some colors in it. So as you go, grab some white sometimes. It can be a little lighter. You can grab some of that gold color. Work fairly quick. That way the colors are all going to blend right on your canvas for you. If you work really slow and methodical, you will have that base color drying, and you won't be able to have these nice mixes that you can get if you are working fairly quickly. If it's a gallery wrapped canvas, I'll usually work along the side as well and get that finished while I have the color out. I'm going to go a little darker sand than I sometimes do so that the writing really shows up in the highlights in that. I'm not really thinking about this too much. I'm going into the ivory, a touch of the gold, sometimes some white. And you see the darks and lights I'm getting in here now? My brush strokes are random. The one thing you don't want to do down here in the sand is go back and forth. It will look streaky, and we want that streakiness up in the water, so I will have you go back and forth. But down here, we are using random little strokes. They could be little crisscrossy strokes. They could be circular. Whatever you like to do, except keeping them uniform and perfect. I like that texture I'm getting with the darks and the lights. You won't need a second coat. This covers enough. So I've got that all done. It's still wet, which I want. And now while it's wet, I'm taking just my gold paint, and I'm going to go along that water line. I'm going to put a little bit of a start of a shadow there where the water is going to kind of come up on the sand. And we're also going to add a little brown shadow in there as well, but let's just get this for now. There. Anytime I feel like there's too much paint on my brush, wipe it off. I usually like to use my dry brush like this to blend. If it needs a little blending anywhere, use that dry brush. And then just keep removing excess paint off with your paper towel. And I want this to dry so that I can put that little brown shadow in. Let me show you what I mean by that. It's just the little shadow under the wave here. It's just a little watery brown shadow. I'm going to hit this with the heat gun just to dry it. I apologize for the noise, but I don't want to have you wait on that drying. So I'm just going to dry that little edge. A heat gun or a hairdryer is handy to have just to dry something if you're a little impatient like I am, and you can just dry that up. There. Okay. So that is dry there. What I'm going to do is just take a smaller brush. I'm going to still use my stiffer bristled brush, but feel free to use a flat or a round acrylic, whatever works for you. But for this technique, I'm going to really water that brown paint down. I'm just taking some clear water, pulling that aside. And with that watery paint, I'm just going to follow this line here. Now, I don't want to leave it as a stiff line like that. I'm going to take my brush and dry it off. And on the bottom of that line, I am just going to soften it out with my brush. Same technique as the sand. If it gets too much paint on there, just wipe it off. Just use that dry brush to get that little edge softened. You just want a little softened edge. You just don't want a harsh line. Now, I don't mind the harsh line on the top. The water's going to cover that. I'm just smoothing it out with that brush on the bottom side. So that's really all we need to do right now for the sand. We'll come back after we do the water and we'll put our starfish and our writing on. I love painting water with this blue and green. Wait till you see how fabulous the colors look. I'm going to use a bigger brush. Again, if you have just an acrylic, kind of a 1-inch or 3/4 inch flat, that's fine too. I mix both these colors just on my brush. I'm not going to work the color up first. I'm just going to mix a little on my brush, and I'm going to start back and forth, side to side with that color. And can you see what a great color that is? It's a real blue-green. And as in painting the sand, I don't mix it too much. Sometimes I take just a little blue. Sometimes I take a little green. Sometimes I take both. I want it to be changing. The color is changing in the ocean. I want it to look a little different here and there. You're going to go down to about here with this back and forth motion, just with those greens and blues. Back and forth. Yep, I'm sliding there. Then I'm going to add a little white into that. So I've got my back and forth nice and smooth from one end to the other. Now I'm going to take just a little of that white, and I'm just going to brush that in here and there. Again, to add a little bit of different dimension, a little bit different color in there. And you can also, while that's wet, go into just to take a smaller brush, take a little white just on the corner. I tap off a little bit. And we don't want the white caps that we're going to have down, not white caps, but the waves kind of breaking in on the shore here. You wouldn't see that way back here. But what you would see is maybe some little white caps way back there. And I'm just lightly dragging the white through here and there. When that's dry, we can even add that a little more if we think we want a little more interest up there. I'm going to mix up a little bit lighter shade of this water mixture we have. Just adding water. I want a little bit of that blue-green back there. I'm going to take a little yellow. I've mixed my blue and my green, white, a little yellow. I just want kind of that green that you see sometimes out there in the ocean, and I can just streak a little of that in. It's kind of a tealy color. A little different than when we add the white. Now, it could be with a brush like this, or if you're more comfortable, you could certainly take your round, your little round brush, and you could add them in like that too. You want them light, and what's nice about it when you do it when that background is wet is this blends in. You don't want it to be a perfect line painted on top that's going to stand out. You want it to blend. So that's all we need to do for the back there. I'll give you a little closer look. I know it's a little glary with the light. Okay, same colors. We're going to work our way forward. A little lighter when it gets closer to shore, as you can see here. Just a little lighter, more of the green in there. And then we'll put those little white waves. I think I will go to a little smaller brush for that section. Actually, I've got one with paint on it already. I'll use that one. So we're going to do the same thing. I'm just going into the blue and the green to start. Maybe a little more white or a little more that light color. I'm going to start back and forth, but here I'm going to get a little motion. I'm going to do some curves. A little bit of motion to those waves. Again, sometimes just the blue, sometimes mauve, sometimes green. And because it's a little lighter down here, as I go, I will add a little white sometimes. You're going to just transition back here from the straight bits just into the curves. You'll come back and get that white on top. But for now, just get a little motion in there. As we get close to this line, it's going to be light. Let's go into just our white and go across that top of that line. And sometimes it helps me to do something like take my painting upside down. You can use whatever brush is comfortable for you. You just want to get a nice line across that shadow that we just put in. As the water comes up to the shore, it does get lighter, almost a little transparent there. Okay. All right. Some of my white of the canvas is showing through, but that's okay because we're going to still have some work to do here. Okay. Now, we're going to get those white waves in there now. We're going to do some now, and it's going to blend in and be a little light and subtle, and then when it dries, we'll add some nice crisp white to the edges. So for now, I'm just going to take the brush I'm using and just dry it off again. And sometimes I like this technique where you take just the white on the corner of your brush, pat it off, because you don't have a lot of control, and that's what you want the look of the waves. You don't have control of them. So you're going to just take that little bit of white there, and you can drag it across and just make little curves. Don't try to make them all the same exact shape. Try to think about having them a little different. Some can start and wiggle and go like this. I like to have them taper off a little bit. And I'm just going to keep drying off my brush and loading fresh white on there as I need to. You can even, if you want to try this with the little white on your edge, you can almost just barely touch it here. You could press the brush a little more, get it a little wider, and then sort of twist the brush and lift it off. So you get that nice thin line to start and thicker and then thin line to end. It's just a little bit of white. Start very light, turn the brush, press a little, and then kind of just taper it away. So you can see how this white is blending in a little bit with the water, which is good in what we want, but we will go back and add some bright white because you're going to notice as this dries, the white settles in a little bit. I'm going to get a little bit of that bright white and go along my edge too here a little bit. And see how as I go along, I've lost my white and now it's just blue again. When you do that, when you lose that white that's on there, just keep reloading. It's a little bit of brush control here. It just takes a little practice. So if you're more comfortable at this point to do it with just your round brush, no worries. You could do that. Just go in with your round brush, start thin, get a little thicker, and a little thinner. And whatever brush, whatever way is comfortable for you. This you get a little bit more control. So you really want to wiggle that around. You don't want it to be too perfect. I kind of like the imperfections you get with these bristly brushes. Sometimes some of the little brush hairs are going this way and that, and it adds a little character. And let's see, I think I'm going to let that go for now because we're going to go back in, like I said, and brighten up some of those little spots. I do like to add some of this lime greeny color as the waves come closer and as they break a little bit, you can see some of that really lime green. Let's brush a little of that in while the paint's wet. That's just these two colors mixed, a little yellow, a little of that green. little white. It's just that color, that color there. And that could go, here and there. Just if your paint is still wet, you can brush it in. And then you can even drag a little up towards the back. Then just dry your brush off like we've been doing and soften it a tiny bit. You just don't want to look like painted on lines. Just soften it in. You've still got the green there. Okay, we're going to shadow under those waves a little bit once that white dries, but let's come back and do that. Right now, let's get down to working on our sand. I don't really need a tracer for this. The writing in the sand is a little wonky and off, so you don't want it to be perfect. And you want to space, as you're sketching on your lettering, space those letters out because you're going to do some shading around it, some highlights around it. So keep a little space between your letters. Some of these I got a little close. So just try to keep them spaced a little further apart than you would if you were just ordinarily doing some writing. I'm going to do my writing in the middle. Then I'm going to put a little heart and a little starfish over here. So I am very lightly with my pencil, or a piece of chalk is even good as well, because if you don't like the way you sketched it out, you can just simply wipe it away. I'm going to just sketch it very lightly with the pencil. And I'll just do Wells Beach for this one. Oops, started with lowercase. I started to go into uppercase. Okay, a little random heart. Remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. If you were on the ocean at the beach sketching on there, you would not have a perfect heart. Starfish, same thing. My starfish actually is a little giant for what it is. I don't care. I'm going to put it in there. It's a big, huge, giant starfish. Do it whatever size you want to. The starfish is just filled in. I take this little yellow ochre color I have, add some yellow. I want it a little lighter, and some white. I just want a color like this. A yellow, but has a little mustardy look to it. It's not too bright. It's kind of a goldy yellow. And just paint that in. I'm using a little round synthetic brush. And again, I'm always moving my canvas sideways and upside down, just so I can reach the little spots that I need to paint with a little easier. All right, so while that little guy is still wet, let's give him a little highlight. Again, I'm going into white, but I'm just going to wipe my brush off. If I can manage to wipe the brush off without going into the water, I don't have to worry about a lot of water in my brush getting the paint even too translucent. So if I can, I just wipe it off and go into the next color. I'm just taking some white on my brush. I just want to, on the left side of this starfish, make him a little lighter. Because the paint underneath is wet, you can see it's blending pretty easily for me. I'm going to make it a little bit darker on the right side. I'm going to just take that gold ochre color straight. And I'm working quickly so that I can blend like this a little easier. Dry off the brush, even though it's a little round, and then that dry brush allows you to blend that color, and you don't have to come back and do anything else there. All right, he gets a little texture. It's just a matter of putting on some little dots of white and brown, and then I give it a little brown on some of the edges. And I can do that right now. I'm using my little round brush. I'm just dipping it into my white. And more of the little white dots are on the right side. And I'm not doing careful little dots. I am just going to dab that on there. It's mostly just giving this little guy texture. You know, that starfish texture they have. It's kind of bumpy. And he's a little whimsical starfish. He's not perfect. We don't want him to look like we're not painting a perfect specimen, but throw some of the light dots over on the other side. And now I'm going to do the same thing with some brown. I'm just going to put some little brown dots here and there. This brown is very bright. I'm going to tone it down with some of that gold. I don't want the dots to be jumping out at you. I want you to see the starfish, not just the dots. This is a little better. A little brown with the gold, or a little brown with your white. If it looks like it's just too bright, standing up too bright. And I'm going to go back and just touch up those dark ones. I don't like the way they're so bright. So I'm just doing some little dots on there, just texture. And then I did take a little bit of that brown, a little lighter, maybe even a little watered down. And I'm going on the side of the starfish, just with a little bit of a, it's going to give it a little shadow sitting on the sand, so it's not just floating on the sand, it's just sitting there. There. I think I just kind of gave him a little white dot on the edges. I don't know why, but it was just kind of fun. There's our starfish. Okay, so the technique for the writing in the sand, it's just a little technique I use, and it's got a few steps to it, so be patient as you go and don't say, oh, it looks awful. Wait till the end, like when we paint all the time, wait till the end. I would use some clear water for this, some clean water, so I'm pulling over a little bit of a clean water here. I am going to use a very watered down brown. I'm going to switch browns. I put this brown out on my palette. It's very red. It's looking very maroon to me, and I want more of a brown. So let me put a little of this out on another palette, because that is just a little too red brown for me. Here we go. Just a tiny, you don't need much, just a tiny little bit. And I am going to water that paint down. I'm using my little round, it's just a synthetic brush. I'm going to water that paint down. You won't know sometimes till you actually get on the canvas with this if it's too thick or too watery or too solid. It's going to be a little kind of a rough look when we do our painting. So say I'll do the heart first. I'm covering my line here, and I'm taking my brush and I'm sort of just stopping and starting and wiggling it a little bit. You don't want a perfect line. Think of writing in the sand. It's not perfect. So I went a little thicker, a little thinner, and it's really watery. Looks a little darker on camera here, but it is pretty see-through. And I'm going to do that same thing for all the writing. I'm just going over my pencil line. Can you see I'm making kind of a little bit of a shaky stroke, a little stop and start, whatever technique works to make it look just a little wonky and not perfect. Very quickly I do that. I don't spend too much time. Just look at your writing and make sure it's not solid, not brown and jumping out at you too much. I can see the sand right through here, which I like. Some letters are bigger than others, that's fine. This is one time where you don't have to worry about getting it right. You just want to have it look sort of natural. Okay, so that is just really lightly done. I'm going to let that dry a little bit before we go on to the next few steps. But why don't we go and add a little brighter white to our waves up here? And again, you can use the bigger brush like I used, or you can use your small round brush. I like to take that white just on the tip. I'm going to make sure my brush is dry because I did wash it, and you never want to really go on with a water-soaked brush. So I'm making sure that's dry, taking a little bit of white on the edge of my brush, and I'm putting it on, and you can see now it's just really showing up a little better. It's getting a little brighter. I'm going to do some with this brush, and then I'll show you the other brush as well. This brush really loads it on a little thick, and it's a little texture, which I like. If this was an enormous big painting, I would probably use the palette knife and really glob on some of that white. But let me show you now with the smaller brush, because it's just as easy. Take your white, and it does need to be thinned. As you're working and your paint seems a little thick because it's been on the palette and it's drying a little bit, feel free to add a little bit of water to it each time, especially for detail work. I'm always adding water. So I'm kind of using as a guide what I have here, and I'm sort of starting and pressing a little thicker and getting a little thinner. Along this edge, same thing. I want it to be a little brighter in some spots. It's because it's curling right on top of that. And I want it to be irregular. Think irregular. Don't have every wave shaped like this over and over. Really, you have to work at it to make it look random. Even if you have a place where you might want to add a little white cap now and you didn't have it before, keep your brush a little thin. If you want, you can go and add some very lightly back here, wherever you want. And so we've got a little more action in our water there. And the only other thing I do now is I add a little bit of a shadow under some of these waves. I just use the blue that we had, the ultramarine, and I thin it down. I want it a little watery. And what I'm going to do is go under, and you might want to wait till your white cap's dry for this, but I'm going to just go underneath my little waves there. See how my paint is very thin? And I'll do a few. I want it to be wet still so that I can go back with a dry brush and soften it from the bottom so it doesn't look like a harsh line. I'm just sort of going in there and giving it a little bit of a dark shadow underneath some of these waves that are turning over. So you would put it in there, and if it looks too much like a line, just soften it with your brush. And you can do that wherever you want under any of those waves. You can even use a little dark blue-green. It's a matter of playing around with it. There's no right or wrong way to do this. You just look at it and see what you like the look of. And sometimes you have to step away. You're working so close with it. You think, oh my God, look at that little mistake right there. No one's ever going to see it because they're going to look at it from far away. So don't be too hard on yourself. Lots of times I have to just let my painting sit for a day or two and sort of just look at it out of the corner of my eye, and it sort of grows on me. I think it needs something else, but then after I look at it after a few days, I'm thinking, I don't mind it. I think it looks fine. So sometimes you can even overwork things. And I'd love it if you share your paintings. So if you watch the tutorial and you paint it, put a post up and show us your paintings. I'd love to see them. Okay, get a little dark under here. And those really look like lines to me, so now I'm going with my dryer brush here and just softening them. I don't want it to look like I did go in there with a liner brush. And if you've lost some of that green blue, because I just love that green. I'm not green blue, sorry, the yellowish green. You can always go in with that a little bit if you wanted a little more of that here and there. And the trick again is just going back in and smoothing it out a little. Just don't want it to look like a line. Okay, I think that's good. And you could sit and play with it forever, but sometimes you have to just step away. All right, now for the rest of the writing on the beach there, we've done the outlining of that watery brown. Now we are going to take our white, thin it down as well, and we are going to just outline what we did really lightly. As a last step when this dries, I do dry brush some sand color over the writing to make it really look windswept and blown and in the sand. So if it all looks a little too bright right here for you now, that will correct that. But you may like the way it looks bright and you don't have to do that sand over. So I am just outlining now everything I did. Roughly, I am not outlining perfectly and following along. I am, with my white, just going on the inside and the outside of that brown line, a little rough, just like we did. I am wiggling it a little bit, starting and stopping. Doesn't have to touch the brown. There could be a little room in there. So can you see how I'm just outlining around just with my white paint? If it's really translucent, just don't add water or add as much water to it. I start with a little water. Sometimes it sinks in too much and I end up going just to the solid white. See how it reacts on your canvas. And just every letter or line, just outside and inside, fill it. Just follow it right along. Sometimes it hits the brown, which I just did there. It's no big deal. It's very rough and random. It's a little dry. See, when the paint dries, it really sinks in sometimes. Some of my pencil lines are showing through here, but in the end, I don't think that's going to matter. If it's too much on yours, you can always touch it up with some paint sand color after, but I think once we get done with all this outlining business, you won't see them. Your eye won't see them. Be fun with some fun beachy quotes on here as well. Or hey, if it's a wedding or a shower, you could do the couple that's getting married, initials, and then the wedding date. So many ways you could use this little technique. Okay, so I've outlined that now. And now we are going to, let's add a little bit just here and there, this gold color. I'm just going to add a little bit here and there, and no rhyme or reason, just here and there. I'm just adding a little bit of that gold color. Doesn't have to be everywhere, just I'm kind of going on the sides of some of the browns here and there. Just adds a little dimension. I like the warmth of this gold color, and I like how it ties in the starfish too. So that is enough, just a little bit of that gold. Let me hold it up. I know it's a little glary, but can you see there's just how I just put it in there really roughly here and there. And we have yet one last little outline, very much like what we did for the writing. It's just very light, it's brown, and it's just going to go on the outside of the white we just did, inside and out. It could be thin and thicker. Really water that paint down this time. You want it to really be softer than that writing was. I know it seems like a lot of steps, but it does give a kind of cool look like writing. So what it is the writing would be etched in the sand, so that's the deepest, and so that's why it's the darker of the writing. And then around that little indent where you've written in the sand, you've got the sand up higher around it, which would be the lighter, so you get that little white highlight. And then again, it turns into shadow. So we're not getting too technical here, but that little technique just sort of gives the illusion of the sand. So I just went around it super light with that, just another little outline. And now we have to let that dry, and then we can do a little windswept sand over it. Now, I like a little bit of some of the darks that I had up here under the water. I seem to have lost that on this. I'm not going to do a straight dark line outlining that way, but I'm going to go back in with some of my watered down brown, just in a few spots. I just want it a little darker here and there. I liked the way that looked on my original painting there. So it's very watered down. Looks a little dark there. It may just sink in too much when I let it dry, but you could just go back if you need to and just add a little shadow there. All right, I am going to hit this with my my heat gun again, only because I don't want to dry brush sand color across that if it's wet at all, and I do want to show you the whole technique. So let me just do that real quick. Cover your ears. There we are, nice and dry. If your starfish looks a little like he's floating up on the sand, I think mine does. I'm taking a little of the gold ochre, yellow ochre color, really watering it down. And just underneath here, I'm giving him a little bit of a shadow, so he is sitting. I don't want it to look the same color as he was, so I'm gonna just maybe mix it with a little of my color I used for the sand. But I just want it to look like a little more like he's set in the ground and not floating around, hovering over the beach. All right, so I do like my dry bristly brushes for this part of it because the texture is nice. But if you have to use one of your synthetics, that's okay. Make sure it's a dry brush, just a little paint on there. It's not going to be white, it's going to be the sand color. So I'm going over and getting some of that ivory. I got it on my brush, but I really am drying most of it off. Look, there's hardly any on there. I'd rather have you start this technique super duper light, not even see it, see if you like it, see the direction it's going, and then get a little bit darker. But I do like to dry brush the sand color right over here and there. I know you can hardly see it, but it's very light. Some areas could even be obscured more than others. Go very light and see if you like the look of it. I like the way it tones down the painting and makes you can still read it, of course, but it just looks a little more like it's kind of a little windswept. So you can see I'm just taking little bits of that ivory and I'm just dry brushing it. I'm kind of going at an angle, not that it matters, right over there. In some areas, like I say, if you want to have it like almost obscured, you can. If there's an area where your brown was a little too dark for your liking, now you can just go over it lightly. And that really is the whole technique. It's really a fun little painting. So that is that. If you have any questions, post them. I will be answering those, or direct message me if you need to. But it's just a quick little fun beach painting for summer. Thank you for watching. I will see you all soon. Have a great day.